He slammed the heavy bulletproof door and told me I was becoming a Moretti by sunrise. I didn't blink as I told him he'd have to take this silk dress off me first, mostly so he wouldn't feel the cold metal of the wire taped to my inner thigh. The gunshot came before I'd even settled into the leather seat. Not at us, past us, a warning that cracked through the Chicago night like a whip, close enough that I felt the SUV's armored panels absorb the impact. Lorenzo Moretti didn't flinch. He simply raised one finger, and the motorcade, 3 matte black Escalades idling in formation, went silent. Engines still running, but every voice, every radio, every breath stopped. That's when I knew I'd walked into something worse than a negotiation. "Your father sent you." His voice was gravel and expensive whiskey, the kind that burned going down. He didn't ask. Lorenzo Moretti never asked. "My father doesn't know I'm here." I smoothed the emerald silk over my knees, aware that his steel-gray eyes were cataloging every movement. The dress had been a calculated choice, elegant enough to signal respect, fitted enough to signal I wasn't afraid. The DuPont lighter clicked open. He lit a cigarette without breaking eye contact, the flame casting shadows across that brutal jawline, the salt and pepper stubble that looked like it could draw blood. The cursive tattoo on his neck, Omerta, caught the light. "Here's the thing, Sloane." The way he said my name made it sound like a verdict. "Your family's been bleeding my territory for 6 months, skimming my ports, buying off my aldermen. Your uncle put 2 of my men in the ground last week." He exhaled smoke toward the tinted window. "Civil ended when he touched what's mine." "So you drag me into an armored convoy to what? Start a war?" "To end one." The words hung between us like a noose. He leaned forward, close enough that I could smell the tobacco and something darker underneath, gunpowder maybe, or just the metallic tang of violence. "You're gonna marry me, tonight, before your father realizes his black sheep daughter just became the guarantee that keeps him from a bullet." My pulse should have spiked. It didn't. I'd known this was coming the moment I'd seen the 3 snipers take position on the rooftops. My snipers. Insurance I'd paid for with money I'd skimmed from the same uncle Lorenzo wanted dead. "Fine." I shifted in my seat, angling toward him. "But you'll have to undress me first." His eyes narrowed. Not suspicion. Interest. Dangerous interest. "That's not a negotiation tactic, Piccolo. That's practical." I reached for his hand, guided it to the hidden zipper at my hip. His fingers were calloused, scarred across the knuckles. A killer's hands. "Because if you're making me a Moretti by sunrise, you should probably know about the wire I'm wearing, and the 3 men with Remington 700s currently aimed at your heart." He froze, not in fear. Lorenzo Moretti didn't know fear, but in recalculation. I leaned close enough to whisper coordinates. Rooftop, 11 o'clock. Fire escape, 2 o'clock. Water tower, direct sight line through your window. My lips barely brushed his ear. "They're mine, my insurance policy. But here's the cruel joke, Lorenzo. If you marry me, they become yours." His hand tightened on my hip, thumb tracing the edge of the wire beneath the silk. "You walked in here with a kill switch. I walked in here with a dowry." I pulled back just enough to meet those ice-gray eyes. "You wanted to end a war? I'm handing you the 3 best marksmen in Chicago, and the only De Luca who knows where every body's buried. You just have to make it legal first." The lighter clicked shut. When he smiled, it was the smile of a man who just realized he'd underestimated his opponent and liked it. "The dress stays on," he said,
pulling me against him with a grip that felt like ownership, until I decide otherwise. And that's when I understood. I'd won the negotiation, but I'd lost everything else. The penthouse occupied the entire 47th floor of the Moretti Tower, and it felt like being swallowed by a vault. Sloane counted 12 security cameras between the private elevator and the foyer. Visible ones, anyway. The hidden surveillance would be triple that. Marble stretched in every direction, Italian calacatta that probably cost $800 per square foot, veined with gold that caught the pre-dawn light filtering through bulletproof glass. Beautiful, sterile, a gilded cage with a $47 million price tag if the property records she'd memorized were accurate. Lorenzo's hand stayed on her lower back as they crossed the threshold, a possessive weight that said mine in a language older than words. "You'll stay in the East Wing until the ceremony." He nodded toward a hallway guarded by two men in identical black suits, both packing shoulder holsters. "Marco will show you." "No." The word stopped everyone. Even the guards' hands twitched toward their weapons. Lorenzo turned slowly, and she watched his expression shift from surprise to something colder. "Excuse me?" I said no. Sloane met his gaze without blinking. "You want me compliant and decorative. You married the wrong De Luca. I stay in your wing or I walk. Your choice." The silence stretched like a wire pulled taut. She could feel the bodyguards calculating whether they'd need to physically remove her, could see Lorenzo weighing control against the fact that she'd already proven herself useful in the SUV. Finally, he smiled, the same dangerous smile from the motorcade. "My room's through there." He gestured toward double doors at the penthouse's heart. "Don't touch the safe, don't open the terrace doors, and if you try to leave—" "The snipers are still yours," I reminded him. "I'm not suicidal, just practical." He studied her for 3 long seconds, then turned to the taller bodyguard. "Marco, tell Sal the ceremony's moved to 0600. I want Father De Luca here with the license before the De Lucas realize their daughter's missing." To the second guard, "Vince, pull the overnight surveillance. I want to know every car that's been within 3 blocks." Both men moved immediately. Sloane watched them go, cataloging details. Marco, 6'3", favoring his left leg slightly, probably an old knee injury. Vince, shorter, stockier, walked with a precise gait of ex-military. Neither met Lorenzo's eyes directly. Standard deference. Except Vince's right hand had trembled when Lorenzo mentioned the surveillance footage. Just for a second, a microtel most people would miss. Sloane had spent her entire life reading the men her father surrounded himself with, learning to spot the difference between fear and guilt. That tremor wasn't fear of Lorenzo, it was fear of being caught. "Here's the thing," she said quietly, waiting until both bodyguards had disappeared down separate hallways. "You've got a problem." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "What kind of problem?" "The kind that costs you $250,000 in shipments and makes your surveillance footage conveniently incomplete." She moved to the bar, 12-year Macallan, Clase Azul tequila, bottles that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Poured 2 fingers of whiskey without asking permission. "Vince is skimming. Has been for at least 3 months, if I'm reading the signs right." That's a serious accusation, but he didn't dismiss it. He was listening. "Check his bank account. Look for regular deposits around $8,000, small enough to avoid IRS flags, large enough to matter, probably under his girlfriend's name or a cousin." Sloane took a sip, let the burn settle. "He shook when you mentioned pulling the surveillance. Only reason a man shakes in your presence is if he's already erased something he shouldn't have." Lorenzo pulled out his phone, typed something rapid fire. 30 seconds later, it buzzed. He read the screen, and his jaw tightened in a way that promised violence. "How did you know?" "My father's organization bleeds money because he trusts loyalty over proof. I learned young, watch the hands, not the words. Vince's hands told me everything." She set down the glass. "You've got 7 men on payroll who answer to you. I can tell you which 3 are stealing, which one's a Fed, and which 2 are actually worth keeping, all before breakfast." The shift happened then. She watched it move through his expression like weather, the cold assessment melting into something sharper, more dangerous. He'd brought her here to neutralize a threat, to tie up a family alliance with legal paperwork and blood vows. But now he was looking at her like she was worth more than a truce. He was looking at her like she was leverage. "The ceremony's in 90 minutes, Lorenzo said, moving close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in those gray eyes. "After that, you're going to tell me everything you know about my operation, every leak, every liability." "After that," Sloane corrected softly, "I'm your wife, which means you'll ask nicely." His hand cupped her jaw, thumb tracing her cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted the steel in his voice. "After that, moglie mia, you'll be the most dangerous asset I own." She didn't pull away, because he wasn't wrong. The priest arrived at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, which told Sloane he was either terrified of Lorenzo or on his payroll, probably both.
Father De Luca was a thin man with kind eyes that had seen too much, carrying a worn leather Bible and the marriage license already filled out in duplicate. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer congratulations, just set up his materials on the dining table while rain hammered against the bulletproof windows, turning Chicago into a watercolor of gray and sodium light. Lorenzo had changed into a charcoal suit that probably cost $6,000, custom-tailored to accommodate the shoulder holster she could see outlined beneath his jacket. He'd shaved, revealing the full, brutal architecture of that jaw, but kept the dangerous edge in his eyes. She was still wearing the emerald silk dress, still had the wire taped to her thigh. "You should change," he said, nodding toward the bedroom. "There's clothing in the closet, your size." "How do you know my size?" "I make it my business to know everything." He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, slid one across the marble counter toward her, "including the fact that you haven't eaten since yesterday afternoon and you're running on adrenaline and spite." He wasn't wrong. Her hands were steady, but her pulse was elevated, her mind running calculations she couldn't quite complete. In 90 minutes, she'd be legally bound to a man who killed people for a living. In 90 minutes, her father would wake up to discover her daughter had made herself untouchable. The question was whether untouchable meant protected or buried. "I'll wear this," she said, ignoring the whiskey. "If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly. I walked in here wearing this dress, and I'm leaving as your wife in the same one." Something flickered in his expression, respect maybe, or just recognition of stubbornness that matched his own. "Suit yourself." Father De Luca cleared his throat softly. "We should begin. I have another appointment at 7. Another appointment? Like this was just another transaction in a city built on them. They stood facing each other across 2 feet of expensive marble while the priest recited words that should have meant forever, but felt like a contract negotiation. Lorenzo's voice was steady, no hesitation, his steel gray eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her skin prickle. When he slid the ring onto her finger, platinum, emerald-cut diamond, probably $40,000, his hands were warm despite the cold rain battering the windows. Her own voice didn't shake. She'd trained it not to. "I, Sloane Vittoria De Luca, take you." The gunshot shattered the moment. Not close, maybe 3 blocks away, the distinctive crack of a rifle shot that carried through the storm. Lorenzo's hand went to his holster before the sound had finished echoing, his body angling to shield her in a movement so instinctive he probably didn't realize he'd done it. Marco burst through the double doors, phone already in hand. "Boss, we've got movement. 2 cars, De Luca plates, just entered the perimeter. They're not stopping at the checkpoint." Her father, of course. Someone had talked. Lorenzo's jaw tightened, and she watched him run the calculation, finish the ceremony or handle the threat. Every second he hesitated was a second her father's men got closer. "Finish it," Sloane said quietly. "Whatever happens, it happens after we're legal." He looked at her then, really looked, like he was seeing past the dress and the wire and the negotiation to something underneath. Then he turned to Father De Luca. "Fast version, now."
The priest's hand shook as he flipped through the Bible, finding the final blessing. The words blurred together, Latin and English mixing with the sound of rain and distant sirens and her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Lorenzo never looked away from her face, even when Marco's phone buzzed with updates, even when she heard the unmistakable sound of the building's lockdown protocol engaging, steel shutters grinding over windows, magnetic locks engaging on every door. He kept his eyes on hers. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The words landed like a prison door slamming shut. Lorenzo pulled her against him before she could process it, one hand tangling in her hair, the other spanning her waist. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was claiming, branding, a public declaration that she was his now, protected by his name and his violence and his empire. She could taste whiskey on his tongue, could feel the holster pressing against her ribs, could hear her father's men somewhere below, trying to storm a fortress they'd never breach. When he pulled back, his thumb traced her bottom lip. "You're mine now, moglie mia," which means anyone who touches you dies screaming. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something worse, relief. Because he was right. In this world, in this city, being Lorenzo Moretti's wife was the only thing keeping her alive. Her father would have married her off to his lieutenant, a man twice her age who collected fingers from people who disappointed him. Her uncle would have used her as leverage in his war with the Iacovetta family, then discarded her when she stopped being useful. But Lorenzo saw what she could do. "They're at the elevator," Marco reported, tension radiating off him. 8 men, armed. "Your call, boss." Lorenzo's hand slid down to her waist, fingers finding the wire beneath the silk. He didn't remove it, just traced the edge with his thumb, a reminder that she'd walked in here armed and left as his partner. "Let 'em come up," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I want to introduce them to my wife." The way he said it, "my wife," sent heat curling through her chest that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with the dangerous proximity of his body, the leather and gunpowder scent of him, the absolute certainty in his voice that he could protect what was his. The elevator dinged, and Sloane realized with crystalline clarity that she wasn't afraid of her father's men. She was afraid of how right it felt to be standing here, Lorenzo's hand on her hip, his ring on her finger, his violence wrapped around her like armor. The doors opened. 8 men poured out of the elevator like a flood of violence in expensive suits. Her father led them, Salvatore De Luca, 63 years old, 5'9" of concentrated rage in a cashmere coat still wet from the rain. His eyes found her immediately, and the fury in them could have melted steel. "You stupid, stupid girl," his voice shook, not with fear, with the kind of anger that preceded bloodshed. "You think marrying this bastardo saves you? You think I won't drag you out of here by your hair?" Lorenzo's hand tightened on her waist. She felt the shift in his body, the coiling tension of a predator about to strike.
She's mine now, Sal. Legal and binding. You touch her, you violate the treaty. There is no treaty. Her father's lieutenant, Bruno, the finger collector, pulled his gun. 3 others followed suit. There's just a dead man and the daughter we're taking home. The mathematics were simple. 8 against 3. Lorenzo, Marco, and Vince, who was probably still stealing but hadn't been stupid enough to run yet. The De Luca men had superior numbers. They had surprise. They didn't have Sloane. Here's the thing, Papa. She stepped forward, putting herself between Lorenzo and the guns. Calculated risk. Her father wouldn't shoot her. She was worth alive as a bargaining chip. The cameras you walked past? Not just surveillance. There's a reason Lorenzo keeps 12 visible and 36 hidden. She tilted her head toward the nearest ceiling-mounted unit. Each one is equipped with facial recognition tied to a threat assessment algorithm. The moment you drew weapons, you activated the automated defense protocol. It was a bluff, mostly.
She'd seen the camera density, noted the military-grade hardware, made an educated guess based on the $2.3 million Lorenzo had spent on security upgrades last year. But she sold it like gospel truth, and that's what mattered. Bruno hesitated, just for a second. That's when Lorenzo moved. He was across the room before Bruno's finger could tighten on the trigger, moving with the fluid brutality of someone who'd killed so many times it had become muscle memory. His fist connected with Bruno's throat, precise, devastating. The man went down choking, gun clattering across marble. Marco and Vince moved in synchronized violence, taking down 2 more before they could aim. But 5 men were still standing, and her father was pulling his own weapon, a nickel-plated .45 that he kept for special occasions, like murdering the man who'd stolen his daughter. Sloane didn't think, she reacted. "Red Team, execute Protocol Omega." Her voice carried across the penthouse with absolute authority, using terminology she'd picked up from 6 months of listening to her father's security briefings. It meant nothing. There was no Red Team, no Protocol Omega, but the 2 men flanking her father didn't know that. They hesitated, glancing at each other, wondering if there were hidden shooters, if they'd walked into a trap. That 3-second pause was all Lorenzo needed. He closed the distance to her father, caught his wrist, and twisted. The crack of breaking bone echoed like a gunshot. Salvatore screamed. The .45 hit the floor. "Next time," Lorenzo said quietly, his hand still wrenching her father's shattered wrist, "you'll remember that my wife is under my protection, which means she's untouchable, which means you just declared war on the outfit over a woman who chose to leave." "She didn't," her father's face was gray with pain. "She didn't choose." "I did." Sloane's voice cut through his protest. "I walked into his motorcade. I negotiated the terms. I said yes to the ring." She held up her hand, let the diamond catch the light. "You would have sold me to Bruno like livestock. Lorenzo made me a partner." Movement in her peripheral vision, one of the De Luca men trying to flank them. She didn't hesitate. "Vince, 9 o'clock!" Vince spun and fired. The shot took the man in the shoulder, spinning him into the wall. Not fatal, but definitive. The remaining De Luca men froze, finally understanding the tactical nightmare they'd walked into. Injured, outmaneuvered, led by a man with a shattered wrist who was quickly losing consciousness from shock and pain. Lorenzo released Salvatore, let him collapse to the marble. Then he turned to Marco. "Call Dr. Chen, tell him we need trauma support for 7 men, non-fatal injuries only. They're leaving here alive because I'm feeling generous." His eyes swept the room, landing on each De Luca soldier in turn. "But if any of you ever come near my wife again, I'll ship you back to your families in pieces small enough to fit in a shoebox." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the rain and Salvatore's ragged breathing and the distant wail of sirens that would never reach this high, never breach this fortress. Lorenzo pulled Sloane against him, his hand sliding into her hair, angling her face up to his. The kiss was brutal and possessive, a claim made in front of witnesses who would carry the story back to every family in Chicago. When he pulled back, his thumb traced her jaw with unexpected gentleness. "Let me be very clear," his voice carried to every corner of the penthouse, to every man bleeding on his marble floor. Sloane Moretti is not a bargaining chip. She's not a treaty condition. She's not leverage. His eyes locked on her father's pain-glazed stare. She's my wife, my partner, and anyone who threatens her is threatening the outfit itself.
He turned to the De Luca men, his expression cold enough to freeze blood. "Take your boss, take your wounded, and when you report back to whoever's stupid enough to be running the De Luca family now, you tell them this: the black sheep just became the wolf, and she's got the whole pack behind her." Marco and Vince moved in, hauling the injured men toward the elevator with efficient brutality. Father De Luca, still standing by the dining table, white-faced and clutching his Bible, made the sign of the cross and whispered something that might have been a prayer or a curse. The elevator doors closed on 8 broken men and 1 broken alliance. Lorenzo didn't let her go. His hand stayed in her hair, his body angled to shield her even though the threat had passed. She could feel his heartbeat against her ribs, elevated but steady, could smell copper and cordite mixing with his cologne. "You bluffed," he said quietly, just for her. "There is no automated defense protocol." "No," she met his eyes, saw the dangerous approval there. But they didn't know that, and now every family in Chicago thinks you've got invisible shooters and AI-controlled kill zones. Your security just became psychological. His smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "You're a dangerous woman, Mrs. Moretti." "You have no idea," she whispered. And when he kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, she realized with terrifying clarity that the wire taped to her thigh, the snipers on the rooftops, the calculated intimacy of that first negotiation, none of it mattered anymore. She'd walked in here planning to survive. She was leaving as the most protected and most dangerous woman in Chicago. The rain kept falling, the city kept bleeding, and Sloane Moretti, née De Luca, stood in the ruins of her father's authority and felt nothing but cold, perfect certainty. She'd chosen this, and she'd choose it again. The commission meeting happened 72 hours later in the back room of Giordano's, the same restaurant where her grandfather had been killed in 1987. Lorenzo had chosen the location deliberately. Sloane walked in wearing Valentino, a black suit that cost $8,400 and fit like armor, with her husband's hand on her lower back and his ring catching every eye in the room. The 5 families were already seated: Castellano, Iacovetta, Bianchi, Greco, and what remained of the De Lucas, now represented by her cousin Anthony, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Nobody spoke when Lorenzo pulled out her chair. Nobody dared. She sat, crossed her legs, and smiled at the men who'd spent 28 years treating her like livestock. "Gentlemen," Lorenzo's voice cut through the tension like a blade, "my wife has information you'll want to hear." Anthony's jaw tightened. "She's not—" "Careful," the word dropped like a guillotine. "The next person who questions her status answers to me personally." Silence.
Sloane opened the leather portfolio she'd brought, slid 8 photographs across the table. Each one showed a different member of the commission's inner circle: accountants, lawyers, logistics coordinators. Each one featured a timestamp and a federal badge number. "Here's the thing," she said pleasantly. "While you've been fighting over territory and shipments, the FBI's been building a RICO case using information from 7 embedded agents, 3 in the Castellano family, 2 in Iacovetta, 1 each in Greco and Bianchi."
Dom Castellano, 70 years old, built like a fire hydrant, leaned forward. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a fact. Verified by the wire transfers I traced, the meeting logs I accessed, and the testimony transcripts I pulled from the federal prosecutor's sealed files." She tapped the first photograph. "This is Agent Michael Reeves, operating as your driver for 16 months. He's got recordings of 43 meetings, enough to put you away for 3 consecutive life sentences." The room erupted. Voices overlapping, accusations flying, hands reaching for weapons that bodyguards had confiscated at the door. Lorenzo let it build for exactly 10 seconds before he slammed his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the glassware. "Silencio." Instant quiet. "My wife," he continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "has spent the last 72 hours cleaning your houses. The agents are being dealt with as we speak. The prosecutor's files have been misplaced, and the RICO case just lost its foundation." He smiled, cold and predatory. "You're welcome." The silence shifted. Not gratitude. These men didn't do gratitude, but recognition, acknowledgement that Sloane had just saved all of them from federal prison. "What do you want?" Iacovetta asked quietly. He was the smartest one here, the only one who understood there was always a price. "What's already mine." Lorenzo's hand found Sloane's shoulder, a gesture of possession and partnership. "That Mrs. Moretti sits at this table as my equal, that her word carries the same weight as mine, and that anyone who disrespects her answers to the outfit." She watched them calculate the value of staying out of prison versus the humiliation of taking orders from a woman they'd dismissed their entire lives. Watched them look at the photographs, at Lorenzo's unwavering expression, at the very real possibility that refusing would end badly. Dom Castellano was the first to nod. Agreed. The others followed like dominoes. "Good." She gathered the photographs, slid them back into her portfolio. "Then let's discuss the matter of Vince Calabrese, who's been skimming $8,000 weekly from Lorenzo's port operations and selling surveillance footage to my former family."
She didn't look at Anthony, but she heard his sharp intake of breath. "Vince was picked up this morning," Lorenzo said. He confirmed that Anthony De Luca paid him $127,000 over 6 months for information on my movements, my shipments, and my security protocols. His smile could have frozen oceans. "Anthony, you have 30 seconds to explain why I shouldn't have you thrown in the Chicago River." Her cousin had gone white. It was." Sloane's voice was ice. "I have the bank records, the encrypted messages, the meeting logs from the restaurant where you handed him cash." She leaned forward. "You ordered the hit on Lorenzo's men. You fed Vince the intel, and you convinced my father to storm the penthouse because you wanted to inherit the family before your 40th birthday." The commission member shifted, sensing blood in the water. "The De Luca family," Lorenzo announced, "is hereby dissolved. Assets will be distributed among the remaining families. Territory will be absorbed into outfit operations. And Anthony De Luca is banished from Chicago, effective immediately." It was a death sentence delivered in bureaucratic language. Banishment meant no protection, no resources, no allies. Anthony would be dead within a month. He knew it. They all knew it. "Any objections?" Lorenzo's gaze swept the table. Nobody moved. Good. He stood, helped Sloane to her feet. This commission is adjourned. They left Giordano's through the back entrance, stepping into a Chicago night that smelled like rain and possibility. The Escalade was waiting, Marco holding the door, but Lorenzo paused on the sidewalk. How does it feel? Your father's empire dismantled, your cousin banished, your debt erased. Sloane thought about it, about the 28 years of being invisible, disposable, the black sheep nobody wanted, about walking into that motorcade with nothing but wire and snipers and spite, about walking out as the woman who'd just rewritten the rules. It feels, she said slowly, like I finally stopped surviving and started winning. Lorenzo's hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with a gentleness that still surprised her. You were always going to win, moglie mia. You just needed the right partner. She kissed him there on the sidewalk, in full view of the bodyguards and the commission members filtering out of Giordano's and the city that would be talking about this moment for decades. When she pulled back, her smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. They called me the Black Sheep, she said, her voice carrying across the rain-slicked street. Now they call me Mrs. Moretti. She slid into the Escalade, Lorenzo following, the door closing on the old world and opening on something infinitely more dangerous. The commission would remember this night. Chicago would remember this night, and every family, every soldier, every man who'd ever underestimated Sloane De Luca would spend the rest of their lives wondering how the discarded daughter had become the most powerful woman in the city. The Escalade pulled away from the curb. The rain kept falling, and Sloane Moretti smiled at her husband, her partner, her equal, her perfectly matched monster, and felt nothing but cold, beautiful satisfaction. She'd married the devil to escape hell. Turns out, she'd been the devil all along.